So what happened to Kenyans in the run-up to the 2022 presidential elections? Why were we voters not so interested in getting information on the leading presidential candidates? Detailed information. Because if somebody is going to hold your fate in the nation called Kenya in their hands, don't you think it's a good idea to know a little more about them? But then maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, because one of the presidential candidates, Raila Amolo Odinga, has produced at least 2 detailed biographies of his life, his political life, his struggle for the nation called Kenya. His track record is all very well known. Kwa hivyo sisomei wale watu walipigia Raila kura, nasomea wale walipiga kura upande ule mwingine. Because let's be serious, for a man who first came into the limelight only in the year 1992, that is just 31 short years ago. And by the way, that is quite an achievement. You come to the limelight for the first time 31 years ago. Today you're president. Well, that was fast. And along the way, you never lose a single election. Well, let those who are wise read between the lines. Okay? But there's more in this very puzzling great mystery. We were warned, not by one person, by several people. President Uhuru Kenyatta had several meetings, very many speeches he made, warning Kenyans to be careful. But it seems some Kenyans ignored him. Francis Atwoli, the chairman of KOTU, warned us. We ignored him. And now, we have yet another Kenyan, a lady this time, a lady called Roselyn Akombe, warning us. Yeah? Of course, I'm aware that many of us did not notice. It was a warning. But if somebody says in their message, in their tweet, Kenyans get ready, what are they saying? They have talked about a 7-year term, and then they tell you get ready. What are they telling you to get ready for? A bus ride to Mombasa for a holiday, for instance? What is she saying? You know, the way you stop disaster is not by ignoring red flags until the last minute. It is not by ignoring what people who should know are telling you until the very last minute, and then you start doing your things at the last minute. That is not how to avert danger. The way to avert danger is to be very alert, to be sensitive very early on, and you take action. You start moving very early on, long before you have reached that place where that danger is. That is the safest way of dealing with the danger. And although I understand that many Kenyans have reached that place of hopelessness, I don't care. What can happen that is worse than what is happening? I don't care. It doesn't matter. I appreciate that is the feeling of many Kenyans. Although we have reached that stage, in my humble opinion, it is terribly important to pay attention to this latest warning. Terribly, terribly important. And that is why I have put together this show for you today, because there are a few things we need to know. There are a few things we need to understand, because they are critical, they are very important for all of us and our future, and indeed the future of our children. Now, I know there are those of us who don't really know who Roselyn Akombe is. So let's do a very quick recap, focusing on why this lady knows too much. She knows better than you. She knows better than me. Because she was there at the center of power, at the IEBC in 2017, when some very dramatic developments exploded, including the murder, very brutal, of former ICT boss at the IEBC, the late Chris Msando. Now, there are some of us old school people who still love to read, and therefore I highly recommend a very detailed article I've written on Miss Akombe on my blog, on one of the 3 Kumekucha blogs. This is kumekucha1.blogspot.com. Make sure you catch it. Now, Akombe first came under my radar immediately after the murder of Chris Msando. She was probably the most affected commissioner. You would have thought she was a close relative. And of course, in my business, it pays to be very observant, to try and see what others may not see very quickly or even immediately. I believe that was sometime in July 2017. And I started digging around. I believed that she knew a lot, in fact too much, about the circumstances surrounding Chris Msando and what happened to him. And that she was the one person who was probably able to talk about it to the press. Unfortunately, I was not successful. But you see, there were a few things which were going on deep inside the IEBC in 2017. And all these things revolved around the person who was in charge of the Jubilee campaign in 2017. Do you know who that is? Do you have any idea? I'll come back to that in a moment. There was a lot of contact between this person and the IEBC, and especially with the IEBC CEO at that time, a man called Ezra Chiloba. And in case you didn't already know, let me now tell you the identity of that man who was in charge of the Jubilee Party campaign for the re-election of President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. That man, of course, was William Samoei Ruto. Let me just leave it at that. You'll find a lot more detail in my latest book on this subject. But what we need to take away here is the fact that what was happening around this time enabled Roselyn Akombe to know Ruto very, very well. A super fascinating aside here is that Akombe fell out with somebody else who was working at the IEBC, who greatly assisted those who were after Chris Msando to get him. In other words, that employee of the IEBC gave information on the movements of Msando. Bottom line, Akombe knows too much, and therefore it is hardly surprising that today she lives outside of the country. She lives and works outside Kenya. That is important. She visited the country at one juncture, when President Uhuru Kenyatta was still president, during the handshake era. Okay? But apart from that, she has stayed outside the country. Unasoma kitu hapo? I'm sure you do. So Akombe comes up with this tweet, and she reminds Kenyans what happened in 1992 with President Moi. I've covered that in my previous video. In case you've not taken it in yet, wait for the link at the top right hand corner at the end of this video and rush and take it in. Super fascinating stuff. Because in any topic, it is very difficult to understand the present without digging very deeply for a context, and that involves going to the past. What happened in the past? Very relevant. So please, if you've not taken in that video, make an effort to do so. It'll be well worth your while, and you'll understand this whole manenos much, much deeper. And so when you look at it this way, you will begin to understand how serious the warning from Roselyn Akombe is, that Kenyans should wake up. Well, we know that the UDA High Command has distanced itself From the utterances, or rather the proposal, to the National Dialogue Committee by Senator Cherargei, we know that. But then this is politics. That actually means nothing. What politicians say means very little compared to what they're doing. And in case you didn't know, very deliberate steps are already being taken to change our constitution to make the presidential term longer, shift it from 5 years to 7 years. You need to know that. You'll get details on that in the article I've referred you to in one of my Kumekucha blogs. Bottom line, this thing about Ruto ruling Kenya for 19 years is not a joke. It is not a pipe dream. It is not just people talking. It's not. This thing is serious. And you know, if this amendment is ever passed, it is going on reverse gear. We're going back. Because there's a very good reason. We changed that aspect of the constitution in the old constitution to limit presidential terms to 2 terms of only 5 years. There was a very good reason. And that reason cannot be changed by any individual, by any good behavior by any individual. It cannot be changed by anything. And indeed, nothing has changed in Kenya to this day. In fact, things have gotten worse. Our leaders have gotten worse. That's the truth. You know, one of the biggest mistakes Kenyans can make is to underestimate the intelligence, the craftiness of President William Samoei Ruto. That could be a tragic error. Because even during the reign of Uhuru Kenyatta, looking back in retrospect, it is now true to say that President Uhuru Kenyatta thought he was president. He thought he was fully in control. But actually, the person who was calling the shots, even very late into the Uhuru presidency, during the handshake, when we had all written off Ruto as finished politically, even that late in the game, Ruto was calling the shots in State House. Indeed, he was still one of the most powerful people in the country called Kenya, despite falling out with his boss. Let me just give you one very shell-shocking example. Information that has come to my attention very recently, to illustrate what I'm saying here. Now, there was a time when President Uhuru Kenyatta was looking to appoint a new director of public prosecution. You remember that? And according to my information, the president communicated to his aides the kind of person he was looking for. And this information reached the then Deputy President, Ruto, although at that juncture, he had already fallen out with his boss, President Uhuru Kenyatta. And what happened next is that Ruto influenced that list. He influenced the shortlist to include a man called Nurdin Haji, whom we all know ended up getting the job. And then we were very surprised when Ruto took over. And we were expecting serious problems with the Director of Public Prosecutions because he was a Uhuru appointee, we all thought and believed. And indeed, many of us were waiting for the fireworks to start. And then suddenly, this was the man who was nominated by Ruto to be the new Director General of the National Intelligence Services. You remember that? And so the statement, Uhuru thought he was ruling, but actually it was Ruto ruling, is accurate. And what that means is that President Uhuru Kenyatta, former President Uhuru Kenyatta, had very many people close to him who were betraying him. They were actually working for the other side, for President William Samoei Ruto, instead of President Uhuru. You know, there are a lot of things that Kenyans don't know about our current president. Very many things. There are many of us who believe that maybe we know a lot. But my research over the last few months has proved actually Kenyans know nothing, or rather they know very little. And all that research has gone into my very latest book, The Ruto You Don't Know, which is very relevant for Kenyans right now. Because for us to be able to predict our future, to predict the future moves of this government, it is very important that you fully understand the main decision maker. Now I've produced this book as an audiobook and also as an ebook here in PDF format, because many of us don't like to read, I know that, but they want information. And today I have a very special offer for the first 50 people who purchase this audio and ebook. And you see, this particular audiobook contains very highly sensitive information. This is a very deep analysis, very detailed, so that we totally understand what we're dealing with here. And so for only $19.92, or Kenya shillings 1992, which is the year that Ruto first came into prominence, Kenyans first heard of him, with the activities of the YK92 in the run-up to the elections in December that year. Yeah. For only 1992, you'll be able to get your hands on this ebook, and I highly recommend that you do not share it with anybody. Very sensitive information. You can see details on your screens right now. Take quick action so that you don't get left out. The price, of course, will change after I get those 50. So please take action right away to avoid disappointment. You know, I find it absolutely fascinating how history keeps on repeating itself. Because once upon a time in Kenya's past, we had another deputy president, actually it was a vice president at that time, who also had a temper that was the stuff of legend. Many people are not aware of this information. Of course, I'm talking about the late President Daniel Toroitich arap Moi. You may have heard of the Nakuru incident, where Lena Moi, Moi's wife, lost her temper and caused a fracas at a National Day dinner dance at State House Nakuru. But there's something that happened immediately after that, which very few Kenyans know about, which my political lecturer gave me details about. Apparently after that function, which greatly embarrassed Daniel Toroitich arap Moi, who was then the vice president, especially in the eyes of the Kiambu mafia. I mean, already they had been making fun of him. And this incident in Nakuru just made things worse. So after that function, when Moi left with Lena, it is said there was another fracas between Moi and his wife Lena Moi at a place in Nakuru, which in those days was called the Eveready Bridge. I don't know if it's still there today. And this particular unfortunate drama left Lena Moi very badly injured. And it was after that that Moi moved his wife to the farm close to Nakuru, where she lived for the rest of her days, alongside Moi's firstborn, Jonathan Toroitich. Even retired President Uhuru Kenyatta once told us about Moi's legendary temper. When he lost it, you didn't want to be anywhere near him. Okay? Don't worry, this is not in my book. I was just giving an example, because my book focuses on our current president. Oh, and before I forget, those who purchase my latest audiobook and are not members of my weekly intelligence briefings will receive 1 year subscription to my highly sensitive weekly intelligence briefings. So it's a very good deal in my opinion. Only $19.92 or Kenya shillings 1992. I highly recommend it. Go for it. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.